Hey, good to see you. Thanks for coming. This is another episode of Wireframe brought to you by Design Systems House. I'm your host, Donnie D'Amato, and today we're going to be talking about chicken or egg. Uh, Figuratively speaking, of course. But a few things to get started. I know I look a little bit like Steve Jobs today. I found a turtleneck after doing some spring cleaning, or I guess winter cleaning, and I was like, oh, let me wear the turtleneck. And it's definitely putting out a particular vibe, I suppose. My wife was like, "This doesn't even look like you," and maybe it doesn't. Maybe this is a new me. It's probably not. Um, Hopefully, you folks have seen some of the recent interviews that I did on the show. For the last couple of weeks, I had some really great ones. The most recent of which was Fareed, who now we can actually introduce because he finally posted it online, that he is the new lead design technologist over at Atlassian. So, congratulations, Fareed, on that role. Really looking forward to seeing what kind of stuff you come out of there. Um, but if you want to be a guest on the show, I'm looking for guests. I would love to have you here. I would love to have some diversity on here because I've had a lot of dudes. And admittedly, there'll be another one next week. But next week, I'm going to actually talk about a little bit as well because it's actually very special. But I would love to have more diversity on the show, so please visit wireframe.ds.house, fill out the form. Love to have you on the show, whoever you are, whatever you're working on, whatever you want to talk about. I would love to have a conversation with you on the show and just share things amongst other people, other than me just talking to you over the camera, which is what I'm doing today. Speaking of interviews, next week I have a very special interview scheduled because this person will be live in my studio. That's right, won't be on the screen over here. It actually be live in the studio. So that's very exciting. I'm going to have to move Stella a little bit farther back over there to have this person in the studio. But as a person who's local, I've been going to a lot of the meetups that this person's at here as well in our neighborhood. So really looking forward to that because I think we're gonna have a really great time of hot takes. We just seeing him the other day was excellent in terms of our vibes and stuff like that. So really looking forward to that next week. Tune in for that. I believe it's on Tuesday next week. So as long as all the schedules align, the stars align, we'll have that happening on Tuesday next week. So I did also want to speak about something else, but maybe I'll speak about it a little bit later. There's something that's been going on in the community, this new announcement of a new site that has to do with UI and AI. I might talk about it at the end of the show today because there isn't a lot on it. Maybe I'll have a full dedicated show once it's actually available, but we'll get into that later in the show. But today, I wanted to talk about this concept of chicken or egg. And the answer to that, by the way, is that the egg came first because whatever came out of the egg or whatever laid the egg wasn't originally a chicken. That's basically the answer to that question. So put that on the table for now. But the thing that I'm really talking about today is when you are crafting a design system, maybe from scratch or redoing it or whatever, what do you focus on first? Do you focus on the design tokens first, or do you focus on the components first? Okay. So because of this question, I'm actually interested to know what AI has to say about this. So let's ask the question for our AI in the studio and see what the answer is on that kind of perspective. So here we go. Let's try. Hey, when you are crafting a new design system or maybe redoing one, what do you start with first? Should you start with design tokens and figuring out what those naming conventions and what you need from them are? Or do you start with the components first and then figure out, what the design tokens might need from there? So which one do you start with that with first? Well, I think I've either clearly stumped it or my my microphone's not working over here on the system. So I'm just going to skip that for now because technical difficulties. Very interesting. But we're just going to skip on that for now. But this is the question that I wanted to pose. And I want to pose this because it's something that I'm kind of dealing with myself right now. And I think one of the big things that is being a little bit weird in my particular case is that components are already being built. They're churning out, and you know that's it's happening. And the thing that is blocking the team right now is they don't have tokens to put into their components. So they are lost effectively or questioning what they're supposed to be putting in to these components in order to style them. And that's the thing that is, I think, obviously challenging when you're building a component and you have, limited knowledge about the stuff that's supposed to go in those things. I mean, again, what I deal with commonly is full stack developers, right? So people that are not well versed with CSS necessarily, or if they know CSS, they are maybe paralyzed by decision with lots of different options that it could be rem or pixels or something else. So they need guidance, and that's what tokens really do provide, is the guidance in which you can choose from a limited set of values to then produce something that's a little bit more standardized, right? But components are happening first in this particular case. So they need some sort of design tokens to support what they're doing. The problem is that, and for most of the folks that are probably watching already know, it takes a lot of thinking to get the right design token approach. Now, me personally, I know the right design token approach. The difficulty there is that getting people to agree on that right design token approach is the harder thing to do. So what ends up happening in a lot of these cases is you have a lots of compromise. And those compromises are completely at the whim of the organization and the culture of the organization, right? Because at the end of the day, and of course, I'm biased because I've created this approach, but the mise-en mode approach of, theming things through design tokens is 100% the more flexible approach, period. It really just is. The thing that makes it so hard is because it's been so different from what people are normally used to. Again, moving all the way back to what people used to be doing, which is having something that's called background color and assigning a direct hex value to that background color, right? Because, as a developer, that's what I see in my mock, and then the red is right there. So I'm just going to pick the red that's right there and plop it on the background color and then ship it, right? And finally, we've gotten a lot more movement because of light and dark mode to people not doing that, right? Where they realize that that needs to be some sort of variable that allows us to change that out. So it's easier so that we don't need to, redeclare all these CSS declarations for specifically for light and for dark. That's what we used to do. But now, because there's a variable in there, I can assign it a new value somewhere else at a larger scope of the whole page or section. But we could do this locally in different sections to just make infinite number of kind of expressions, right? But because that's so hard to wrap your head around, that a variable could have a different value at any point in time. I mean, especially, and I was just thinking about this the other day, especially since the big thing when it comes to at least JavaScript developers is that very, very rarely do I see people use the keyword let to describe a variable. It's very more popular or more common to use const as a variable. Now, if you don't know what the difference between let and const is in JavaScript, effectively, it's they're both the same thing in terms of being able to declare a variable, but the big difference is that you cannot redeclare what a const is. So once you create a const, it stays as that value that you have assigned to it throughout the entire ecosystem of the application, throughout the entire life cycle, right? So if I say const um, number 2 equals 2, then I could use number 2 as a variable across the ecosystem and have confidence that it doesn't change. Meanwhile, if I choose let number 2 and equals 2, then it's entirely possible that for whatever reason, later on in the application, I can go ahead and change the variable number 2 to equal, I don't know, 3 or 4 or something like that. Why would you do that? You wouldn't do that, right? Where you wouldn't have something that says number 2 and then have it assigned as some other weird value. But what you would do potentially is have something that um, has a name that you can change the value to over the course of the life cycle of the application. And now I'm moving a little bit out of the JavaScript realm and more into the CSS realm, specifically because that's what we do when we are figuring out if something's supposed to be light or dark, right? We don't want to have to redeclare everything when it's light and redeclare everything when it's dark in the application. We want to separate that decision outside of the application and make um, the right semantic choices across the whole thing. So I might have tangent there a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of preface by talking about the importance of having semantic tokens and figuring out what that's supposed to be, and then also compromising on strategies for design tokens. So there's a lot that's involved when trying to figure out what your token set is, right? Now, meanwhile, you could also start with the design tokens, which is going to take a long time to do right, especially, again, knowing everything about your organization and the plans that you want to have, and also looking at all the resources that are available outside, right? And all the different things that other people have done. It's very confusing, right? Because this team over here has done something one way, but this team's doing it another way. This guide over here says to do something completely different from both of those two. It's wildly confusing. And it becomes confusing because of those reasons, right? Because of the compromises that these teams have needed to take due to several factors, right? So that's why it ends up taking so long, and why when we're talking about a standard in terms of design tokens, the only standard that we have really is the design tokens community group, and that's just a standard for storing them, right, and transferring them across systems. It's not a standard at all about the naming convention. And as many people could joke about, naming is hard, right? Naming is hard, and that's what design tokens unfortunately ends up being all about, is really just the naming. All the infrastructure stuff, that's honestly fairly easy, and we've been doing that for a long time, but the naming thing is the thing that ends up being so widely contested, so widely different across systems. So that's the reason why these things take so long, and why you have to be very careful about naming, because when you introduce something and people are supposed to use it across the system, something so small as a variable, if you change that, people get upset. You can't just typically hide, internal changes like you would in a component inside of a token, right? So again, think about those two things. You have a component where, maybe the API interface is the same, but you can manipulate the way that everything works internally and not have anyone like worry about all those changes. Like we've done that a couple of times in the stuff that I've worked in, where um, you'll have some like API interface that happened in version 1, but the API interface that happens in version 2 could be the same interface, but it just does different stuff internally. And nobody out there needs to know that it does internal stuff necessarily, because it's all internal. So the upgrade usually ends up being a lot easier. When you change the API interface, that ends up being a lot harder, because now you need to do some sort of migration. That migration could be internal to the component, where it accepts both kinds of configurations, or it could be a lot more painful, where a person who's ingesting the component and needs to use the component between version 1 and version 2 now needs to make their own changes. And that's what typically ends up happening for design tokens. So if you have a version 1 of design tokens and then launch that, and then learn that, oh, we messed up some things, or we need to change some things because of that, and make a version 2, the migration for people to move from version 1 to version 2 is usually one of the most painful things to do, right? So that's why, me personally, I put so much time and care and effort into making sure that the design tokens that I'm trying to figure out for an organization align to the expectations of that organization. That's why it takes a long time. But I totally recognize the need to have something up front for people to be building components, because component building isn't going to stop, right? Component building never stops. So that's the why I'm asking the question about chicken or egg, where you're now at the onset of potentially building a new system. What's the first thing that you do? Because the other thing that you kind of think about too is it's like, you know, if I have these tokens, right, and I'm going to be making these tokens that are going to be for these components, well, how do I make the tokens if I don't know what components I'm building? So, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? I mean, especially when people have component tokens in lots of systems, big systems. They have component tokens. They have, banner background and modal backdrop and error text and all these other things that, how could you possibly know what tokens you need if you don't have the components yet, right? So that's the real question that I'm asking about when we're talking about chicken or the egg, right? Because how could you possibly know the tokens you need if you don't have the components? But then how could you build the components if you don't have the tokens that you need to finish those components, right? So that's the chicken or the egg. Ultimately, that took me at least 15 minutes to to really ask the right question here. But I have to, I'm a person who likes to set up the conversation. So when it comes to the component part of the whole thing, right? I what I'm trying to do is I would prefer to have a temporary set of, I'm not even going to call them design tokens, a temporary set of variables that are meant for the component library to move forward with. Because the other option there is the hard code stuff, which is not themable, but if that's okay for you, that's also fine. But when you hard code stuff, it makes it a lot harder for you to find all the places where hard coded. So if you have a variable in there, then it's a lot easier for you to find where you need to update. So having a variable in there is good. But the flip side of that is that when you distribute this component library and people start ingesting this component library, they're going to see how these things are constructed. It's just inevitable. And if the variables that are inside of there are considered temporary because you're still working on the design token infrastructure, right? It's entirely possible that people will believe that they can also use those design tokens that are internal to those things for their own purposes, right? Maybe there's a component that's not built yet. Oh, well, I'm going to just reuse the variable that's already in this component because it's already there in my component because this team is using it, so we must be able to use that. That's the mentality that I've seen. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have a V1 of design tokens, find out that things are not working out, right? Goodness gracious, people like call me when I'm live. Have a V1 of design tokens that aren't working out. Then you do a V2. The migration pain of moving to the V2 is serious, right? Because the person said, "Oh, I found this variable over here I can use," right? I'm going to start using that. Then we rip out all those variables to put in the new design tokens that we want people to be using. And then the team that was building this thing that used that thinking that was okay, now all of a sudden is complaining, well, you broke my stuff. And then we say, well, we never said that you were supposed to, use that. Well, they say, well, now, I'm never going to use your stuff because I can't trust it, right? And that's a miscommunication that happens. So my recommendation in that is to actually make the variables hard to use. Now, what does that mean? That means that when you make your temporary variables, I recommend putting emojis in those variables. And this is something I've talked about in previous talks that I've done, specifically in interoperable tokens, where you could use tokens across SCSS and JavaScript. One of the things I actually do recommend in there is to actually have emojis in your variables. And there's several reasons of that. And one of those reasons is because it's harder to type. And when it becomes harder to type, especially by hand, people are less prone to trying to use them directly. Now, in interoperable tokens, you aren't writing the emojis directly. Okay. What's happening there is that all of the references are easier to write, and then they resolve to these emoji variables that you can see that these are different from the rest of the variables that are sitting inside there. But they're also meant for you not to be, messing with, because they are special variables. And we have a mechanism in which you can get these variables. But in the case of things being temporary, because again, doing an interoperable token situation, that takes a lot of infrastructure to do. If you need to get variables out in front of people to start making components localized to a component library, having the emojis in there, yes, is a pain for the people who are building stuff for the component library. I recognize that. But it's also meant to be a pain for the people who are outside looking at these variables, potentially putting their grubby little paws on to use them and not realizing that they're temporary, right? So what I'm expecting to try to do there is to effectively make it less accessible by design for people to use these tokens. Now, there's ways of making it easier for the library itself to use these tokens. You can have TypeScript autocomplete for these things to make it easier to type. But ultimately, when I'm thinking about this stuff, I'm trying to think about the actual people who are going to use this, and how the perception of this stuff is going to work, right? And the amount of effort that it's going to take, and how to unblock people, and all of these different things that I'm paying attention to, because I'm empathetic to people overall, and I'm empathetic to myself, and about the amount of support requests that I've had where we do something inside of the library that I'm maintaining, and people look at that same thing thinking that it's the right thing to do, when meanwhile they don't have any of the context about why it's done that way, right? And then they do it too, and then all of a sudden it blows up because they didn't have the context. And then they blame us because they were like, hey, we were doing it the way that you're doing it. So those are the things that I'm sensitive to when we're talking about which thing that you're going to do first, right? Because if you end up doing components first, and the components, they need design tokens, you need to put something there to make sure that the folks are unblocked. But if you put anything in there, it's entirely possible that that anything becomes the thing. And then the migration from that thing to the thing that you really want never happens, right? It becomes years before it actually happens, because the thing that was temporary, oh, well, that's temporary, we'll change it later. Later becomes 2 years later, and then the next time you go ahead and try to do that, nobody cares anymore, because it's the same thing. You'll have temporary again. You'll never have an opportunity to do it right, right? So that's the thing that I'm most sensitive about. So in my opinion, I believe that design tokens are meant to be first. That's what I believe. And I believe that's mostly because that I have a good understanding of intention and what it means to be a semantic token. I think that's rare based on all the things that I've seen in the industry about what people think is a semantic token. So that makes it really hard. What also makes it hard, of course, again, is the organizational maturity and culture of, recognizing how something like mise en mode could work, but unfortunately can't wrap their head around it. So that requires us to introduce more tokens that would be otherwise necessary. So things like t-shirt sizing, right? T-shirt sizing is not semantic. You could fight me on it. It's not semantic. Anything that has a scale is not semantic, right? Because each value depends on another value. It's not wholly available on its own. And that's what semantic really is all about. Background color for the button while closer to being something that's a component token, that's not a primitive token. It's not a base level token. It is something that's semantic. It means something. Every button's supposed to get this background color. When I have something that says space 4x, where does that go? It's very subjective, right? So when you have something like that where it's a mix of semantic and not semantic, those are trade-offs, and you have to weigh those trade-offs. That's the thing that's so difficult, right? I will say that the majority of systems out there have a mixed token system where their colors probably mostly semantic. The spacing, none of it's semantic. Not a single system out there has semantic spacing. Not a single one. Topography is definitely a little bit of mix of both. For some folks, they'll have truly semantic tokens that deal with topography. Other systems don't. They'll have a scale that deals with topography. And you would imagine that topography is meant to have a scale. It doesn't need to have one, at least not one through tokens. So that's the difficulty there, right? Is that we got on this path of having semantic tokens for color, but then the practice can't figure out the rest of the semantic stuff, or at least I'll say agree on the semantic stuff for that. Makes it hard. So all those compromises come into the design tokens, makes it a lot more difficult to actually launch the design tokens because we're trying to figure out where the compromises actually are, and that would block component development overall. But again, if you stay semantic, then the components actually don't matter, right? You're going to have non-interactive surfaces. You're going to have interactive things. You're going to have form elements. You're going to have things that are regions that are colored by certain rankings. Those are effectively the things that you're going to be dealing with in UI. There's really no difference in all those, right? That's why mise-en mode, I claim that you can define or express any interface with less than 3 dozen tokens, because there's less than 3 dozen expressions that are actually on any particular page. Or I should say less than 3 dozen intentions that are on any particular page, right? The things that we're trying to intend to convey to the user, those don't normally change. You want a user to read something, it's text. You want a user to click something, it's a button. You want a user to input something, it's an input. There isn't a lot of variation past that. Sure, you round some corners and increase some text, absolutely, but those are just expressions. You still need to have the fundamentals of the web and what users are expecting. We need to meet user expectations. You go ahead and create an interface that people have never seen before, the adoption is awful for those things. So aligning to the people's expectations ends up being a lot more successful overall. Doesn't mean you can't experiment, but it just means that you're going to have a lot of difficulty with trying to provide intentions to those things and meeting people's expectations. I mean, the example that I love to give is the timeline component. Most systems don't have nor need a timeline component. But I think it's a really good exercise in terms of figuring out intentions. Is your timeline interactive or not interactive? What parts are interactive of that timeline? Is there a hierarchy to that timeline? Right? All of these things are potentially questions that you could ask to any component inside of your system and then have agreement about what that intention is. Right? So as an exercise, let's say I need to build a timeline component. It is interactive. And each one of these points in the timeline has some information about it. Well, the information about it would appear when I click a point on the timeline that's marked, right? So if that's the basic example of the whole system, well, I have non-interactive parts of the timeline, which would be potentially the line itself might be non-interactive because the points will be interactive. Then the points themselves, they're interactive. Well, I have other things that are interactive that need to be shown as, hey, you could click this. So that treatment should be shared across components. So effectively, the timeline points should be styled as buttons because you can click them, right? Which kind of button you could decide on yourself, but they should be styled as buttons, right? Then when you click that thing and something appears where you're supposed to read it, well, there's other things, most likely, in your interface that you're meant to read with hierarchy, right? So you have some kind of headline, maybe an overline, maybe you have some body in there, maybe there's some buttons and links in there too. There's no reason why those things should behave differently than other elements in the system. They could look different, but there's no reason why they should behave differently, right? A button should behave like a button. Whether it looks like other buttons, different, it could be different, but it should behave like a button, right? Headline text should behave like headline text, right? Cards should behave like cards. And then putting all that stuff together onto a timeline component, which effectively is just this bar that shows progress. And I'm sure you have the concept of a progress bar sitting around somewhere in your library. You already figured out how you're building your timeline. And you already have all the pieces in order to build that timeline, because all those intentions are already things that already exist in your system. Things that are not interactive, things that are interactive, and things that are expecting input. That's basically it, folks. It's not that hard, but we want to make it hard. And people are making it hard. And that's where the compromise comes in. But you know what? Let me know what you think. I would love to know in the comments, or I mean, I'm live right now. I see there's 2 people in the chat, and one of them is definitely have to be me. So if you want to have a comment in the chat, absolutely let me know about your thoughts on chicken or the egg. What do you think should be first? Should you work on making sure your design tokens are as done / perfect as possible, or should you start with the components because you know that you're going to be building them, and those will potentially inform the kinds of tokens that you might need? Let me know what you think. And if you don't want to, think about it, as a comment in this video, and you want to have a real significant discussion, go ahead. Discord.ds.house. Join the Discord. Let us know what you think about, the topic, about which thing you should be doing first, design tokens or components. I'm interested to know. I would love to have your feedback on that. And let me know about all the other things I talked about today. I mean, do you put emojis in your variables? Because there's a lot of pros and cons for that, for sure. But anyway, you let me know. That's basically the topic for today. But I do want to do our wireframe challenge and see if there's anything interesting that we can pull up from that today. Let's go to the challenge here. All right, what does it say? All right, if you, by the way, this is the Wireframe challenge. You could play at home by going to wireframe.ds.house/challenge, and what you'll get is a random prompt, effectively a design prompt, and just think about how you might tackle that prompt. So I haven't read the prompt yet. Let's see what it says here. The prompt today says, make a trade show booth for a hot sauce brand in Australia. All right. I think I did Australia maybe a couple of shows ago, but so I'm not a hot sauce person, so I don't know anything much about that in terms of hot sauces. But trade show booth, I'm not thinking CES level trade show booths, right? I'm not thinking like these huge, gargantuan, kind of like $1,000 setups. I'm thinking of a person who is coming in with 2 suitcases and needs to do sell some hot sauce. That's what I'm thinking about. So I think a really, I don't know if it's tacky, but I think it would be at least visually interesting. Is there's the like fake flames that are like this like windbreaker material of flames that like flop around like this. So you would have a fan underneath them, and the flames look like they're like on fire or whatever, very like cartoon like, but at least the motion would have a little bit of eye-catching interest. Like that's what motion's all about, right? Motion is meant to capture your eye, so having some motion and showing a little bit of the flame there, I think would be really cool. And maybe like that flame is coming out of like a cartoonish mouth, and maybe that shows something. And maybe you could even like grab some of the hot sauces out of the mouth as like off the shelf or something like that to purchase or to try. I don't know. I mean, speaking of trying, right? You're going to have samples. I'm assuming on the booth, right? So I would maybe there's something about the samples that's really interesting. Maybe instead of the samples being on like a spoon, like a basic spoon, maybe they're on um, something else, something related to Australia. I don't know. Maybe they're on the Opera House, right? This in the Opera House. Maybe that's what it is, or maybe they're on that rock that's in the middle of the continent. I don't know the name. I don't remember the name of it. There's like that special rock out there. But yeah, something that maybe be aligned to Australia. I wouldn't want to put it on an animal. I know Australia has some interesting animals out there. I wouldn't want to put it on an animal. I think it's maybe a little bit not great, but I would probably put it on something that Australians known for, and put the hot sauce on there, and then you could taste it from there. I think that would be cool. So that's what I would think. All right, let's go to another one. All right, make a digital sign for a zoo in Texas. Okay, I think I did zoo before, but digital sign for a zoo in Texas. Well, everything in Texas is big, right? So I expect that kind of thing to happen. I know there's a lot. I haven't been to Texas. This is just stuff from what I heard, and I have coworkers from Texas, so that's basically what I'm going off of. But I know there's a lot of driving to do in Texas because it's a really big state. So I suspect that you would want to have the digital signs as like effectively billboard size. And again, because it's digital, let's put some motion on there, right? So make it a little bit eye catching for people. I also suspect that you wouldn't want to put these things on highways that don't get traffic. I mean, at a baseline, obviously, you need people to be on these highways, right, for in order for them to be useful. But the reason why I'm saying traffic is that the bumper to bumper traffic that we get here in New York, I'm a lot more prone to seeing a billboard driving because of the traffic than if I was driving in traffic, right? Because if I'm driving, and just cruising along, I'm not really looking at billboards, right? Because I'm focus is on the road, or for really bad people, their focus is on not the road, but just definitely not a freaking billboard. But if you're stuck in bumper to bumper and there's nothing to do, right? And you're just looking around at stuff, in the neighborhood, that's where your billboards are showing, right? So that's what I would expect from like a digital billboard from something that's like a lot of driving, right? When it comes to Texas, I don't expect a lot of walking. Maybe in Dallas. I haven't been in Dallas, so or Austin. So maybe that's where the digital signage is. But I again expect a lot more people to be looking at signs on the road in Texas than walking around in Texas. So I would recommend probably digital signage on a billboard over anything else. But I'm imagining there's other like common areas that a lot of people go to, maybe movie theaters or other entertainment spaces. Maybe that'll be good for there. Um, and then yeah, on the billboard, we're talking about animals moving around and stuff, doing cool things, being cute, all that stuff. I think that basically covers how I would do that kind of thing. But yeah, that's what I'd say about that. All right, last one. Texas again. All right, make a tattoo for a gym in Texas. All right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of kinds of gyms, because there's weightlifting gyms, boxing gyms, aerobic gyms, those kinds of things. Um, a tattoo for a gym in Texas. I mean, I imagine you would either be using the shape of the state of Texas or the Texas flag in some way there. If it was a boxing gym, then maybe you would like make the boxing gloves into the shape of the state of Texas? Because, I mean, you could finagle a little bit of the shape of Texas into like this kind of shape, right? I think this is kind of similar. So it's close. Just put this down, and you're kind of boxing a little bit. So maybe it's more appropriate to put like the flag on the boxing gloves. Maybe that's pretty easy. You know, I imagine it would be a little bit more appropriate to not necessarily have a tattoo for a specific gym in Texas, but rather the concept of being a person who likes to go to the gym. So if it's a boxing thing, that would be that. If it's a weightlifting thing, maybe you put it on a couple of barbells, the same kind of thing. Maybe you lift the state of Texas, as a barbell or kettlebell. Maybe that's how it works, right? Maybe that could be interesting. Um, yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about there. Again, I don't have any tattoos, so I'm a little bit out of my wheelhouse there. But thinking about what I might do, I think that's what I would do without thinking about too much. But anyway, um, hope that was interesting for you. Again, go to wireframe.ds.house slash challenge to try it for yourself, and hopefully you don't get so much Texas in there, or maybe you do. Maybe you want Texas a whole bunch. That's okay for you, right? That's what we care. Um, yeah. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. But I have one more thing, and I mentioned it earlier in the episode, is that there's this thing that just launched. Yeah, and I don't have any real opinions about it yet, but there have been some opinions online, and it's this thing um, called wrong one, called UISH. Let me see if I can actually fix the size here, so you can actually see it. Bear with me, but actually, while you're bearing with me, you can visit UI.sh on your browser if you like, and kind of what's it called? See for yourself, so to speak, because it's I don't know what this is necessarily yet. I really don't know. Again, people have been talking about this a little bit already. It is brought to you by the people who made Tailwind CSS and refactoring UI. That's what it says on the bottom as I'm resizing my window to make sure you can see it. Um, so yeah, it's brought to you by these people. And it says turn your terminal into a design engineer, and it also changes into a couple of other things. Let's just go ahead and put that right there. I think it also says a couple other things. Let's see if I can refresh the page and says, yeah, so it says turn your terminal into an interface designer, turn your terminal into a front-end wizard, and turn your terminal into an accessibility expert. But at the bottom here, it says a toolkit for coding agents like Claude Code, AMP, Cursor, OpenCode, and Codex to help you build UIs that don't suck. All right. So, like I said, I don't know what this necessarily is yet. My assumptions are going to be about, okay, you're going to be in your terminal, and you're going to be making, I guess, UIs from the terminal. Immediately, that just sounds like a conflict of interest. But look, again, these are the same people who decided that CSS wasn't good enough and decided to write CSS in their HTML, and then eventually wrap back around, or actually wrote CSS in HTML and JavaScript, wrapped back around and wrote it in CSS for Tailwind 4. So I don't know. But you could absolutely expect some opinions about this from me later on for sure once it actually gets launched and people start talking about it. But I just wanted to let people know that this thing is out there for people to see if they have some opinions about it. But I do want to say one more thing, which if you've been staying this long, which I do have another person who's looking, which is great. There is the event that I've been talking about has a website now. So I launched this website a couple of weeks ago. I think I mentioned it on a show before the interviews that I was doing, but because I've been doing interviews, I haven't been focusing on telling you folks about this. But it is undefined.ds.house. Undefined.ds.house is going to be the homepage for the event that I'll be first running, at least in New York City, sometime this year. Once I get all of the affairs in order, and you can visit the site now. Here's an illustration of me. Yes, it's AI generated, to kind of just stay with the motif of the look and feel there. But hopefully, there's interest in this kind of thing. Again, to describe it a little bit better, it's kind of like Jackbox, but for the tech industry. So kind of Jackbox related questions. You'll be using your phone to answer things, and you'll get a report that you're able to take back, almost like the results of a workshop, to your teams to potentially inform decisions about things that you should do, and maybe even come to compromises like we talked about earlier. So go ahead, visit the site. You can subscribe to the event calendar also that's on Luma, and get notified immediately when the first event comes up. So that's good. And the last thing I'll mention before I wrap up is the book is so close to being done. I have an e-proof that's in my inbox. I'm be spending this weekend to actually read over the e-proof as well as my editor. Once that's done, I'm going to be ordering myself a physical proof for me to do the final looks, and then I expect the book to be out first week of March. That is the plan. So that's all the news I have for you today. I would like you to show up for next week on Tuesday about 5 o'clock for my live in-person here in the show. Very exciting. Hopefully this turns out really nice. But anyway, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching. But before you go, please help out this show by smashing the like and subscribe button to get notified the next time that we go live. As I said earlier, feel free to continue the conversation at our official Design Systems House Discord by visiting discord.ds.house. Okay? Play nice in those comments, and I'll see you on the internet. Bye.